Will you stop that? Don't you have some laundry to do?
Oh, you're right. I've got to do like your father did and separate the whites from the coloreds.
Well, at least he believed in something.
Hey y'all, welcome back. Today I'm going to be diving into a long-forgotten sitcom called That's My Bush. It's a Trey Parker and Matt Stone project that's centered around the Bush family and his assistants. It had some initial success, yet 18 years later, any trace of it seems to have vanished from the earth. So, what happened? How did a show with these two names attached basically disappear? Is it worth revisiting, or does it deserve to remain forgotten? I'll address all of these if you'll let me, so let's go! In my eyes, That's My Bush was successful at what it set out to be. It's a mesmerizing replication of a sitcom. The show has a lot of fun with cheeky sitcom acting, with every performance being so over the top, it's wonderful. Many stock characters are featured, like the sassy maid, the neurotic assistant, the pesky neighbor who enters with punny quips.
Say, George, come over and see my matter you.
What's the matter, you?
Nothing, paisano. What's the matter you?
The finale is a lot of fun satirizing bad spin-offs. Bush gets fired from the White House and runs around a bunch of other sitcom situations trying to find a landing spot.
Drinking and joking and having fun with my friends. I like my beer with a shot of laughter. I hope I can beat this cancer so it
The show is just flat out hilarious too. And while there's plenty more to talk about on the comedic side, I want to spend the rest of this section talking about the show's sharp commentary. And I want to take a moment to dispel a myth that tainted the show's initial reception. It doesn't set out to belittle the president. The fact that Bush is naturally a bumbling man was just a coincidence.
Fool me once. Shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again.
Rather, That's My Bush uses the presidential family as a framework to discuss issues within sitcom culture. We first see the sitcom framework utilized in its plot structures. The episodes use elements of a president's life as a backdrop for sitcom plot tropes. For example, in the series opener, the sitcom episode is 2 dates to the prom, but here the two commitments are a date with Laura Bush and a summit to discuss abortion. Now, it begs the question, why bother linking political topics to sitcom plots like this? In my eyes, they're attempting to show how absurd sitcoms are by having a world leader navigate these generic situations in the childlike manner we normally see in sitcoms. In one episode, George tries to get Carl and Lorraine Rove locked in a room to work on their marriage, but when things go wrong, George reacts like this.
I don't know. Carl knows like what, and he can't explain to people until I trap him and his wife in a small space!
In my eyes, this moment isn't making fun of George Bush, the real, actual former president, for being incompetent. It's arguing that the way sitcom characters deal with conflict is, at the least, unproductive and, at the worst, harmful. This idea is reinforced by the characters having a lot more power than a typical sitcom lead, making their mistakes more noticeably important. Audiences usually find it charming when a hapless dad screws up in sitcoms, but rarely do those mistakes carry real-world weight. George, however, holds the fate of a country in his hands, and his mistakes have consequences. George needs to be better than the bumbling stock character he's placed into. The audience needs to be better than these characters on screen because, much like George, our choices carry consequences we don't see sitcom leads experience. Therefore, George exists as an outlet for us to see the damage that comes from handling situations like a sitcom character would. Now, I'm not saying that we replicate actions we see on screen, but sitcom characters are meant to be relatable, and sometimes we normalize how they act or take on their character traits, and that relationship is necessary to deconstruct when the characters handle situations in harmful ways. Obviously, characters need flaws to make compelling stories, and characters in sitcoms usually learn from their mistakes. So if characters are learning, then there's an outlet for the audience to learn and not internalize their behavior. But as the show suggests, lessons in sitcoms aren't that effective. Each episode ends with a moral wrap-up, but a certain irrelevance is asserted when discussing the show's serious issues with such a cheesy approach. One time, George destroys an Austrian building while trying to get free cable.
Now I just got to connect the coax to a ground. Whoa! Wrong wire.
The staff is then captured as Austrians retaliate. However, the episode's moral focus and its wrap-up is focused on how stealing is bad, not on how horribly negligent he was as the president.
I'm not putting that bootleg cable device back on my TV anyway, because stealing from huge corporations is still stealing, and I was wrong to ever think otherwise.
So the real lesson is missed. As an example from another sitcom, an episode of Family Ties involving pressure to have sex ends with a focus on "you'll know when you're ready," instead of the fact that the boyfriend was breaching consent.
I don't want to make love tonight.
Why not? We talked about it. We planned on it. I got the flowers.
Focusing on the more easily palatable but wrong issue here is harmful for an audience as they finish an episode. Audience members could easily walk away from an episode like this, not even really recognizing what the boyfriend was doing wrong. This inability to meaningfully reflect on serious topics is something That's My Bush criticizes sitcoms for. On top of critiquing their harmful structure, deconstructing the mean spirit in sitcoms is central to That's My Bush. While plenty of friends in real life clown on each other, sitcoms can have a mean sense of humor about them.
Wow, you look just like your son, Mrs. Tribbiani. What?
Every defense he gives is met with silence, whereas every joke about how the bag looks on him is met with laughter.
It's got compartments for all your stuff. Your wallet, your keys, your address book, your makeup.
So in keeping with the show's playful tone, the episode is outwardly kind of mean to Joey. Parker and Stone place much of the blame for this mean spirit on the audience. Early in episode 1, Laura makes a snide comment about George.
Thank you, George. You're the best, even if you are a clueless bastard sometimes.
Oh, one of these days, Laura, I'm gonna punch you in the face!
There's a lot to unpack here. George's line references Ralph Cramden's famous refrain.
One of these days, pow, right in the kisser.
Having never seen The Honeymooners, I had assumed the line came from a one-off dramatic episode or that the show as a whole were a drama. But no. Turns out throughout the whole series, the wife will make a quip and the husband will respond with that threat of physical violence, which the audience laughs off. With this parallel, we're shown a way that the playful tone of sitcoms can normalize toxicity. Since George's refrain is repeated at the end of every episode, That's My Bush is attempting to illustrate how these negative ideas can be normalized through repetition, especially if an audience buys in. We see harmful negativity pop up a lot in Maggie.
You have a better solution, Maggie?
Yes, I think George should take his own life.
How's that gonna fix anything?
Make it a lot nicer for me.
Her comments create an environment where ridicule is the norm. In other sitcoms, this mean spirit pops up constantly.
What a stupid name.
Oh, Titus Medea?
No, Kelly. Never liked that name. Of course, I wanted a son. Never got one. Damn right.
This environment of ridicule is exactly what That's My Bush aims to criticize. The toxicity is expressed in many ways, too. One time, Laura approaches Maggie for relationship advice, and Maggie responds as such.
Come on, you've been moping around all week. You can talk to me about it.
Yeah, this isn't really something I can talk to you about.
What is it, sex?
How'd you know?
We're women, honey. It's either sex or shoes.
Here, Maggie is cultivating a really harmful misogynistic standard that women only care about sex and material interests. And with this joke never really being challenged in the episode, the implication is that with the audience laughing along, these harmful ideas are going unchecked and starting to become normalized within the audience. Along this vein, we see a sharp critique of how women are portrayed with the characters of Laura and Princess. Both are on the receiving end of ridicule, and in Laura's case, it's aimed exclusively at insecurities. She fears that George isn't attracted to her anymore, she feels George doesn't spend enough time with her in the White House, and she has a mother-in-law whose critical comments are vile.
We'll be right out. Just relax, Mom.
Don't you tell me to relax, you stupid $2 truck stop slut!
$2?
The sitcom universe is shaming Laura for her fears and insecurities, and unlike her husband, Laura isn't really given the stage to assert herself. Things just happen to her, and she's expected to take the punishment and get over it by the episode's end. I think the critique here is that sitcoms tend to have a male focus and sometimes trivialize what women go through, and Princess,
Mr. President, I was reviewing your schedule on my Palm Pilot and realized you only have 10 minutes to save the Earth from the Xinthians.
That's not a Palm Pilot.
Princess, that's a Game Boy.
Princess fills the role of the pretty and ditzy character. She's objectified in almost every scene she's in.
Mr. President? You know I might be able to help you. Phew. I thought I was going to be drowned in tar.
Well, you can drown my tar anytime you like.
And being both dumb and pretty is all her character has. Her stupidity and objectification peak in episode 4 when her conflict is that she's insecure about her intelligence.
Mrs. Bush, can I talk to you?
Yes, Princess.
Am I stupid?
Oh, sweetie.
She wants memory enhancement pills, but she accidentally buys memory enhancement pills.
Just think what 20 will do.
Throughout the episode, her boobs get bigger. She doesn't notice, though, and believes she is actually getting smarter.
My brain is like a sponge now, just soaking up whatever information it can find. Go on. Ask me anything. Anything you want about the ingredients in cake mix.
Later on, her tiggle biddies help the gang escape capture. Here we see that Princess is only valuable to this world through her body. She didn't hatch a plan to help them escape. She didn't even, control her boobs to rig that escape. Her boobs just accidentally kept growing. Parker and Stone are trying to show how in sitcoms, women can be stripped of agency and reduced to being an object, being stupid, or being both. Once again, through audience reinforcement, Princess is put in a box that she has no means of escaping. Princess bears a stark resemblance to Kelly Bundy from Married with Children.
What was that?
The doorbell.
Ah.
Kelly, too, is reduced to being just dumb and an object.
Daddy, I'm afraid if I keep doing this, people are gonna think that I'm all body and no...
Mind?
No, I don't mind, go ahead.
She's only important to the show as a person to gawk at, and more often as a person to make fun of. That's my Bush in emphasizing the lust for Princess and playing up her stupidity, critique this character type that Kelly Bundy fills. That's the bulk of Parker and Stone's critiques of sitcoms, but the show manages to sprinkle in political critiques too. At the end of an episode about the death penalty in which George accidentally murders somebody, he is morally torn.
Well, George, look at it this way. It's no different than that 152 men you put to death in Texas. You just actually did it yourself this time.
It's just so easy to execute all those people on death row, Laura, because they were just numbers to me.
This joke initially went over my head, but in my research I found that in his 5 years as governor, George Bush had 152 inmates executed, more than any governor in the state of Texas at that time. This joke calls to attention his desensitized stance on death and how quick he is to ignore its moral weight. At one point, George dismisses Maggie off to do laundry, and she says,
Oh, you're right. I've got to do like your father did and separate the whites from the coloreds.
Context for folks like me who weren't born yet. Right after its passing, he called the 1965 Civil Rights Act radical and said,
The new Civil Rights Act was passed to protect 14% of the people. I'm also worried about the other 86%.
Yeah, that take didn't age well. The show was calling his past to attention, or at least reminding folks about it. Episode 6 involves the White House broadcasting a celebration of the 100 millionth drug offender arrested during the war on drugs.
You have to be high to want to do drugs.
The absurd showmanship of it all aptly critiques how overzealous the war on drugs was, and how the presidency seemed more concerned with jailing folks than any form of rehabilitation. In conclusion, Parker and Stone crafted a bold critique of sitcoms, managed to make it absurd and enjoyable along the way. But the show is not without its flaws. First off, I think the series opener betrays the neutrality it tries to set up. The episode tries to both sides the topic of abortion, But walking away, I realized one side is underrepresented. The pro-life leader is a wisecracking character, while the pro-choice leader is just a stereotype.
If she's the leader of the pro-choice movement, let me guess. She's got a butch haircut, a bunch of feminist beads, and a gigantic ass.
She doesn't deliver a single line that gets a genuine laugh from the audience, while jabs at her expense always get laughed at. This dynamic betrays the both sides approach the episode boasts, but it also fails at being satire. Let's remember, satire requires a clarity of purpose and target lest it be mistaken for and contribute to that which it intends to criticize. Couldn't have said it better myself, Tyler. So let's take a minute and ask, what were Parker and Stone trying to say? Is the pro-choice lady meant to be commentary on the right's stereotypical image of a feminist? Or is the show actively straw-manning the pro-choice camp?
Nice to meet you, Joyce. Can I call you Joyce?
You already did.
That's great. Come on in.
Mr. Bush, let me be frank.
Yeah, I think that makes more sense than Joyce.
So what are we supposed to make of this joke? Is it making fun of her gender expression? Or does the joke exist to critique conservative approaches to gender expression? We're free to perceive it either way, but the problem is that the purpose and target are unclear. That's My Bush muddles its approach like this because they ride the line between expressing political ideas as a parody and expressing their own opinions. A character in a normal sitcom would not joke about George H.W.'s racist history. That joke exists in a manner outside of the sitcom. It's for us. But other jokes are for the in-universe studio audience. We're more so just meant to laugh at how corny the jokes are. So because they have jokes in both of these camps, it's hard to tell where some of the jokes are meant to land. The series has many moments like this where the lack of purpose pops up, and the lack of clarity is an active detriment throughout the series. And lastly, the show rarely has people of color, and they're never featured. They're only ever small roles. Going back to our question of intent, is this a critique of family sitcoms, a critique of the whitewashed administration, or a failure on the part of Parker and Stone to involve diverse voices? Again, not sure. When people of color do appear, it's for good reasons. A Cuban man is the 100 millionth drug offender, highlighting how people of color were disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. A Native American man is used as a prop to justify drilling in Alaska, which critiques how people of color can be used to score PR brownie points.
Most protesters think that Alaskans don't want us drilling for oil on their land. But that will all change when we put Canuck in front of them and have him say that he thinks drilling for oil is good.
Oil good?
When George gets fired and has to move to a poor neighborhood, his quirky neighborhood in D.C. is now a black man, which highlights how segregated the city still manages to be. These are valid casting choices that lead to a certain critical end, but that doesn't mean other characters in the show couldn't be people of color. If they really wanted to lampoon horrible tropes, the maid could have been a black lady. It would make her quip about George Sr.'s segregation more poignant, and could be used to deconstruct a lot of deeply rooted stereotypes surrounding black women. So while the show is funny and satirical, white people are really the only ones who get to join in on the fun of criticizing sitcoms. After looking at the show's content, let's go back to context and ask, how did the show get lost to history? Simply put, it didn't bring in enough money and wasn't fondly received. Despite a strong opening, ratings quickly dropped. Some audience members loved the show, but reviews were mostly mixed, indifferent, or outraged. Plus, production budgets averaged $1 million an episode, and $1 million an episode isn't terrible, but Comedy Central wasn't big enough at the time and the show wasn't bringing in enough money to justify those costs, so it got canned. Parker and Stone were understanding, but the pair had planned on writing a movie follow-up. However, soon after the show's cancellation, our nation found itself in turmoil after the September 11th attacks. Parker and Stone realized that it wasn't the time to make a movie that poked fun at George Bush. By the time they returned to making fun of the president, the ship had sailed on the movie follow-up. And here we are, 18 years later. It's not on any streaming services, and very little is written about the show. Given the lack of info, I was close to missing out on the show myself. And I say miss out as if that's a problem, because at the end of the day, I think That's My Bush is worth a watch. Despite its flaws, the absurd moments are a treat, and its commitment to sitcom replication is commendable. Its critiques of sitcoms are mostly well thought out and are unique to the form. I found myself craving more episodes once I got to the end, which for me is a pretty sure sign that I was enjoying myself. So yeah, I would say That's My Bush is definitely a forgotten masterpiece. Thanks for watching, y'all. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe down below and click the little bell so you can know the exact nanosecond I release my next video. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter @PileyBenton, because I post funny jokes there occasionally. Had you seen the show before watching this video? Do you have any memories of its release? If not, is this the first you've ever heard of it? Let me know down in the comments. I'm really curious what kind of impression the show had on people over the years. Thanks everybody, and I'll see y'all next time.